throat thing. So, welcome to the Western Regional meeting for today. Let's see. We'll talk a little bit more about manual prep. I know we talked about it last week too, but or 2 weeks ago, and at the data dig. But it's a big deal. So we're adding into the template a receipt page for providers. So when you give the providers the manual, they need to return the signature page that says they received it, they understand the policies and the procedures. And then we're going to have a similar receipt page for families, but those will be up to the special education teachers to make sure they collect those. But you guys will be responsible for making sure these providers are accepting, are getting that manual and signing this receipt page to acknowledge they got it and they read it. So that way, if they come back some point in the middle of the year and say, well, I didn't know that was in the manual, you can say, well, you signed this. And then it'll also be like within reason to withhold assigning students to those providers that haven't signed them yet. So you can make that part of the deal as well. Once we roll out that manual template next month, there's going to be red text and there's going to be yellow highlighted text. The yellow highlighted text is new content, so it's going to be different, or maybe language is added from last year's version, or it's completely new section altogether. And anything in red text, you need to update for your specific school, and you need to review that portion with the SPM. So just something to keep in mind when it's time to get to those. The manual states that credentials, there's a section in there where credentials are supposed to be listed for each therapist or discipline. And a lot of the manuals didn't get that part updated last year, so we want to make sure you guys are including this in the manual. You can visit the state's Department of Education website to find those requirements for each discipline: speech, OT, PT. Those are the big ones. And all of the ones that we want in there are going to be listed in the template. Right. We're also that spreadsheet that Caroline's been sending out to you and your special programs managers. That's part of acquiring the accurate information for your state. So that project is going to help with this portion of the manual. And then they also is also listed for evaluation requirements in the manual. And you can find that on the DOE website under SPED requirements to determine disability. So those are the keywords to look for on the DOE website in your state. And for those schools that use Medicaid, you're also going to want to include the requirements that Medicaid has in place in your state. Anyone have questions about any of that? All right. New providers. When you guys get an RPI added to your Trello board that has a new provider and their information, make sure you put that information in RSM and then make them inactive. So you can see in that first rectangle That's where you add a new provider, and then the box on the bottom, that will pop up, and that first toggle there is where you can make them inactive. That way, our recruiters already have a record in RSM of providers they've reached out to, and just trying to keep, whether they work out or not, whether this is someone you're going to end up contracting with or not, because this will allow our recruiting team to kind of to look and see, oh, this provider didn't work out for this reason, or maybe the school found someone else, but this is still a viable option for the future. So make sure you're adding those as soon as the RPI card is added. And I believe that was added to the checklist on the new checklist on the RPI card. So
yeah, and on that, you'll see in that screenshot to the far right of the top screenshot, there's that contract hyperlink. If you guys click on that, that's where you'll make notes about, you reached out to the provider, you have these documents, they declined a contract, and put in notes in that area about why they may have declined a contract, or why they're not working out for your school. So that way, when our team is hunting for someone, they're not reaching out to a provider that's already been reached out to that said, absolutely not, we don't do online services, or we don't do this. It's helped in some schools, like, for example, I had a school, Alabama, where needed an OT really, really bad. There were 3 or 4 OTs, and they don't do school-related OT services. They don't work on handwriting. And so by having that in that contract tab, Lena knew not to reach out to them again because they won't meet the student goals. It's just a waste of time.
Makes sense. Thank you, Caroline. Anyone have questions about this? All right, moving on. There are some low-cost insurance options if you are coming across a provider who maybe is a new speech therapist who's trying to start out on her own and doesn't have liability insurance, and that's kind of a bump in the road for her. There are options for therapists in certain disciplines through these nationally accredited organizations, and this information has been made available to Lena, so she can kind of do this step before sending it on to you guys. But if a therapist ever asks you or has expressed to you that the liability insurance is just too expensive, here are some places they can go for low-cost insurance. So for psychologists, there's the National Association of School Psychologists. For OT, awesome. American Occupational Therapy Association, ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, and the Council for Exceptional Children. Caroline, do you know what the Council for Exceptional Children, is that the specific plan?
I think that they covered like people who had like DOE certifications.
Okay.
Where sometimes they'll already be covered just in their membership through that.
Okay. So here's some options, and I'll send this PowerPoint out so you guys can save these, bookmark these, or whatever you need to do, just in case that comes up. Services that are less frequent than weekly. So it kind of came up that, if someone has a monthly service and they have 3 no-shows in a row before they're marked non-compliant, well, that could be 3 months that the student goes by without getting any services. So for these services, you may need to stay on top of providers a little bit more. Make sure they know that services still need to start within 5 days. even though it's a monthly service. If they wait till the end of the month and then can't get a hold of the student, that's really going to impact your timeline. So make sure they know they still need to reach out and have their first session within 5 days of the start date. And if they do have trouble getting in touch with the family, they need to let you know immediately and continue to try to reach them. They have a whole month or a semester or a quarter or whatever it is to get in touch. And, if they're only trying once a month, that doesn't really do justice to the student. And it's just something that's come up recently that we want to make sure we're staying on top of those services just as much as the weekly. Does anyone have any feedback on that? We've just seen it happening in a lot of schools where kids are kind of going a few months because it's a monthly service and the provider thinks, oh, I just need to reach out once a month. That's not the case. So make sure you're looking at those a little closer. Group services. Just wanted to run through this real quick as a refresher. If you have a group service that's identical to an individual service, like speech therapy, 30 minutes a week, and one is group and one is individual, you want to make sure for the individual line you select group therapy requested, no, but identical service has group. And if it is the group service line, you want to select yes, and then yes, group items only. Does that make sense? Simone, to answer your question, the nursing services at Nevada actually do not affect your timeline because it's considered an other service. That's something I kept looking at and I kept thinking, oh, if we could adjust this somehow, and then I kept being reminded it was an other service, so it doesn't impact the timeline. So you can still continue to put it in as once a year. And it won't impact your timeline though, because that particular service is not considered when looking at timelines for recurring services. All right. That's all I have, you guys. This is a quick meeting. Anybody have anything they want to bring up? Maybe roundtable discussion? All right. Well, have a great Wednesday, everybody. Thanks, you guys.